We have already talked about arrays and loops separately. Now I want to show you how to use some of the array helper methods. These methods are part of ES6 JavaScript and they do a kind of similar job that loops can do. I'm going to describe a couple of commonly used array helper methods. The first one is going to be the ForEach method. So let's go ahead and create a new array. It's going to be names, and let's put here a couple of names. First one is going to be Alex, then Mary, Nick, and Jane. Suppose that we want to output those names in the console. Before I move on to the ForEach method, I'm going to use for loop first, and then we will do the same task with the ForEach method. So let's use for, then initialize the variable I, make it 0, then I should be less than names.length, and finally we need increment I++. Let's run to the console. The name is plus names with the index number I. So we have the names in the console as we expected. Okay, now I'm going to show you how we can get the same result with the ForEach method. At first, let's make here a little border to distinguish the results in the console. And now let's use the ForEach method. So we need to attach this method to names. Then we need to pass here a function which will be actually an iterator function, and this function will be executed for each array item. You can use here either keyword function or you can just pass here an arrow function. I'm going to use an arrow function. After that we need to pass here the parameter. We need to insert here the current item of the array. There is a special convention for array helpers in JavaScript. For example, when we use the name of the array in a plural form, then the current item, which is passed as the parameter, is used in a singular form. So I'm going to put here name, and then finally let's display the names in the console. Run again. The name is plus name. So as you can see, we have here the exact same result in the console. Alright, let me explain how the ForEach method actually works. So when the code runs, the function is executed for the first item, which is Alex, and we get in the console the name is Alex. Then the function is called for the second item, Mary, and we have the name is Mary, and then the same happens for Nick and Jane as well. Then because of that we don't have any more items in the array. ForEach terminates execution of the function. Make sense? Alright, so you see we got the same results in both cases, but when we used the ForEach method, it was kinda shorter way. We typed less, and if you type less, it means that there is a lower chance to get errors and bugs. The logic is much more simple than it is in case of the for loop, because you don't need to define all of those conditions and statements. So it is better to use ForEach instead of for loop in some cases. Alright, again I recommend to test this method and also other methods that will be discussed on your own, because those helpers are some kind of similar methods and it is easy to be confused if you don't practice a lot. Okay, let's move on and talk about another array helper method, which is a map. As it was in the case of the ForEach method, I'm going to compare the map helper to for loop. So suppose that we have an array which consists of some numbers. Let's create a variable numbers and then put here a couple of numbers. So let's assume that we want to multiply each of these numbers by 10, then keep the result from each iteration in a new array without changing the original one. So let's go ahead and create an empty array. I'm going to call it new array and assign to it empty square brackets. Now let's use for loop to iterate through the numbers. Let's declare variable I and make it 0. Then we need the condition I is less than numbers dot length followed by the increment I++. So in order to add the results to a new array, I'm going to use a known array method called a push, which adds new item to an array at the end. So we need new array with the push method, and inside the parentheses we have to insert numbers with the index number I multiplied by 10. Okay, so as we said, we want to create a new array and keep the original one. So let's go ahead and log both of them to the console. So here we go. We have an original array and a new array with new items. Alright, it's one of the ways to get this result, but we can do the same in a much simpler and easier way using map helper. Let's again make a border here. I'm going to create a new variable and store the result into this variable. So let's create map array, which should be equal to numbers dot and use here map helper. The syntax is very similar to the ForEach method. We need to pass here an arrow function, and then as the parameter, let's insert number in this singular form. After that, I'm going to insert the block of code. As we said, we're going to multiply each number by 10. So we need return statement, number multiplied by 10. Now let's go ahead and see in the console what do we have. Log at first the original numbers array, and then newly created map array. So as you can see, we have the exact same result here. But in this case, you can notice very clearly that the amount of code is much less than in the previous case. We got the same result in much more simple way. And the most important thing to note is that you realize at a glance that logic is much more simple to understand. You must keep in mind that in this case, we always need to use the return statement, because if we miss it, then we will get an array with the undefined values. Alright, now let me explain how the map helper method actually works. So at first the function is executed for the first item, 1. It is multiplied by 10, and then the result is added to an empty array. Then function is executed for the second item, which is 2. It is multiplied by 10, and the result is added to a new array as well. In the same way, the function is executed for the third item, then for the fourth one, and for the last item as well, which is 5. All the results are added to the new array. Again, remember that when we use map array helper, the original array is kept as immutable, which means that it's not changed. Make sense? Alright, let's go ahead and use one more example. Suppose that we have an array of persons, which consists of several objects with properties first name and last name. Let's write here John and then the last name Smith. Then duplicate it twice and change the values. I'm going to use Bob, Brown, and Nick, Doe. Now suppose that we want to group the first names in a new array. For that, the perfect way is to use a map array helper. So let's create a variable. I'm going to call it get first names. It should be equal to persons.map. Let's pass here again an arrow function with the parameter person. So as we said, we're going to group the first names of those objects, so we need to return person.firstname. And then log both variables to the console. I mean persons and get first names. So here we have our original persons array and then the new array which consists of the first names of the objects. You can try the same with for loop and you will be 100% ensured that map is much more convenient and fast way to set up this same logic and get the same result. Alright, the next array helpers that I want to describe are filter and find. They work in a similar and simple way, so let's go ahead and talk about that. I'm going to start with the filter helper. Let's go ahead and create an array of persons, which will consist of several objects, and suppose that we want to filter these objects depending on some condition. So let's create persons and insert here objects with name and gender properties. The first name is going to be Mary, female. Then duplicate this object 3 more times and change the names and genders properly. Second one is going to be John, male. Then Jane, female, and finally Bob, male. As we said, we want to filter those objects, and suppose that we want to choose only male objects and add them to a new array. For that, at first, we need to create a new array called males. It should be empty. Then we need to use for loop in order to iterate through the items. Choose the proper one and using the push method, add it to the new array. So create for loop, then initialize the variable I, make it 0. Then we need condition I is less than persons.length. And finally I++. So here we're going to use if statement, and as the condition we need to check if the gender of the person is equal to male. So let's use if with the following condition: persons with index number I dot gender equals to male. So if this condition is true, then we need males dot push, and we have to pass here persons with the index number I. So let's log both arrays to the console, I mean persons and males. So here we have at first the original persons array and the filtered one, which consists of male persons. Alright, so in this case we used for loop, and now I'm going to do the same using a filter helper. Before that, let's separate the code again. So I'm going to create the variable females, and in this variable I'm going to store all the female persons. So we need here persons.filter. Actually, the syntax is similar to the previous methods. We need to pass here an arrow function with a parameter person, which again will be in the singular form. So as we said, we want to choose the female persons, therefore we need to write a return statement in which the gender property should be equal to the female. So let's log both variables to the console, I mean persons and females. So you see that at first we have again the original persons array and then the filtered array, which consists of female persons. So the filter method did absolutely the same job, but again you see at a glance that we needed for that less time because of the less amount of code, and again the logic is very simple and easy to understand. Alright, so let's recap how the filter method works. On the first iteration, the function is executed for the first object with the name Mary. Mary has the gender female, the condition is true inside the function, therefore it returns a true value and the object is added to the females array. Then the function is executed for the second object, which has the name property John and the gender male. The condition is false, so the function returns a false value and therefore the object is not added to the array. Then in the same way the function is executed for the third object, Jane, the condition is true and the object is added to the array. As for the fourth object, you see that gender is male, function returns a false value because the condition is false, therefore the object is not added to the array. Alright, that's the way how filter helper actually works. Let's move on to the next helper, which is a find. As we said, the find method works in the similar way as the filter helper does, but there is only one difference. Filter helper iterates through all the items in an array. If the condition is true, then it adds the item to the new array. But in case of find helper, when it finds that the condition is true, it adds the current item to the new array and then immediately terminates looping. Make sense? Okay, so if we change here filter into find, then we will get only the first object because the condition for the first item was true and the find helper stopped iteration. We can reach the same result if we use for loop. For that, we just need to pass here known break statement, which actually stops looping through the items. So you see that we have the same result. Alright, so that's it about the array helper methods. They are really helpful tools and you will be using them very frequently when you work with the JavaScript in the future. Okay, let's move on to the next topic.